at some of the statistics that we have here, still on Earth, 1 billion people do not have access to a basic road. If you look at efficiency, 70% of fuel energy is wasted in driveline and problems with driving. We know that by 2050, there will be 1 billion more cars. That means a doubling of the number of cars on roads. Let's look at safety, dramatic performance. Over the past few years, the road traffic accident tripled. And we also know that transport is responsible for 23% of energy-related greenhouse gas emission. So those statistics are quite starking and tell us that there is clearly a need to do more. And so the question is, what is missing in the equation? The World Bank Group put forward a proposal, a concept on the table at the Climate Action Summit, which consists of 3 concepts. One, we need a global vision on sustainable transport with clearly articulated goals. Second, we need a program of bold and ambitious actions that will really give us the scale and the scope that we need to transform the world's mobility going forward. And then finally, we need a group of actors, a coalition that will carry this vision and will implement this program of bold and ambitious actions. So let me start by the vision. We propose a vision that reconciles and integrates the SDGs targets, the Paris targets, and much more. It's a vision around sustainable mobility for all, which consists of achieving basically simultaneously 4 goals. One is the issue of access for all, essentially ensuring that everybody has access to economic and social opportunity by providing the transport infrastructure and the transport services that are very much needed. This is the business where MDBs are very active. But is this enough? No, we need to go beyond. We need to tackle the issue of efficiency that is embedded in the SDGs. So we need to give prominence to this agenda as well. We need to tackle the safety agenda, and the safety agenda, fortunately, is already embedded in an SDG target. And then we have the Paris Agreement that consists also of a number of commitments on greenhouse gas emission. So this vision basically is supported by 4 goals, and we believe that at the end of the day, if those 4 goals are achieved, it will improve significantly the lives of billions of people on Earth in terms of health, in terms of environment and quality of life, and it will help us meet the Paris Agreement and stabilize climate change. Now, what will be important if we articulate a vision with those goals is that we put in place a very solid global tracking framework that would allow us to monitor progress of every single country in terms of achieving those targets. Now, you would be maybe surprised to know that actually this global tracking framework does not yet exist. And when you look at what we currently have in terms of indicators and data, we are really short of providing the solid data and analytical basis to support any of those goals. So we put forward the idea that we need to develop as a global community this global tracking framework to give the accountability and the transparency that is very much needed. So that is the first aspect, the vision. Then we need to look at actions. Now, when you look at what already exists, you can see that a lot is already happening. And here we just identify a few actors that have been, over the past few years, committing voluntarily, most of the time, on a number of things. And these actors only focus on goal 4. So imagine if we were to look at achieving goal 1, 2, and 3, how wide that map of actors and initiatives would be. So let's look just at goal 4. We have countries, they have committed to achieve a number of targets through the INDCs. We heard about 52 out of 56 Islamic development client countries have actually committed that. We have cities. Cities have been also very active in that space, making all kinds of commitments. The private sector also has been committing, for instance, in Paris, 260 transportation companies committed to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And then we have the MDBs. The MDBs have committed in 2012 to increase their lending for sustainable transport to 175 billion, so a significant portion for supporting the climate change agenda. And then in Paris, MDBs also agreed to meet a number of climate finance targets that I will come back to. And then you have a number of other organizations that in Paris committed to do all kinds of other things. Some have committed to double the public sector, the public transport share. Some have committed to do more on rails. Some others have committed to do more of green roads. So clearly a very crowded space. The question then is, how do all these things add up? And do they add up to actually ensure that we meet just the goal 4? Now, there is a need to actually map out how each of them contribute to these goals. Our sense is that there may be there some duplications, maybe there are some gaps. And what is very clear is that many of those commitments are voluntary and therefore unfunded. So there is very much a question of looking at those commitments in the context of the financing that is needed to actually make all these things that they would like to do. But our sense is that it will not be enough. We need scale and focus to really transform the world's mobility. Now, in the short term, there are a number of things that can be done, and we will hear from another panelist some of the quick wins that are being proposed. But we believe that we need more. We need a program of bold and ambitious actions. And although work is ongoing to actually define what this program of action should look like, in our mind, it's very clear that a number of actions are absolutely essential. One is to look at this issue of climate finance. And currently, MDBs are working together to actually make a case for more funding for sustainable transport or climate-friendly transport to all these climate funds. You would be surprised to know that actually only 13% of the climate funds are actually supporting sustainable transport. The rest is going to energy. Why is that? Another very important dimension is to look at carbon pricing. And about a month and a half ago, a global coalition to look at carbon pricing and accelerating efforts globally on carbon pricing has been launched. So there is very much an expectation that it will go beyond just knowledge sharing, but actually actions. So let me focus, since this is the topic of this seminar, on the issue of climate finance. In our mind, we need to radically transform the architecture for supporting sustainable, climate-friendly transport. If you just look at the numbers, very little is actually currently going to transport. I talked about the climate investment funds, 13%, but that's not all. The Green Climate Funds, for instance, that was recently set up, very few transport projects. The Clean Development Mechanism, only 30 projects out of 7,000. Carbon finance, 7 million out of 1.7 billion. If you look at official development assistance even going towards transport, it's actually very small. 8% is going to transport. The rest is going to all the other infrastructure sector. Even though transport is a significant contributor to economic growth, to getting the climate change agenda under control, etc., etc. MDBs actually commit every year $25 billion for sustainable transport. The World Bank, about 6 billion. Yet, out of this, less than a quarter is actually considered as supporting a mitigation or adaptation objective. So there is an issue of not only doing more, but doing a certain number of things that will help us to achieve those goals. So there is clearly a need to more financing. There is also very much a need of moving away from what has been the approach so far, which has been very much project by project basis, a few projects here, a few projects there. But really, when you want to tackle the ambition of this agenda, you need to look at the whole, for instance, city space. You need to look at transport system. You cannot simply look at your particular BRT. So we need to move away from project to project to a more programmatic approach. And then more fundamentally, and that will be probably the most difficult part, we need to broaden the criteria for making all projects in transport eligible for this type of funding. Transport, most of the benefits are in terms of greenhouse gas emission, are only visible in the long term. Yet, most of those funds require those projects to demonstrate an immediate effect or within the first 5 years. So of course, at the end of the day, only energy projects can access these fundings as opposed to transport projects. So there is clearly a need to look at the whole architecture of financing transport and then revise and adapt it to new reality. So the third element that we have put on the table is who will carry this agenda? Who will push for this vision and these targets to be achieved? Who will push for this program of bold and ambitious actions? Can we rely just on the existing structure, or do we need an additional mechanism that will really give the visibility and the political will that we need to transform the world mobility at scale? So we have put forward a proposal that we need a global coalition of actors, and actors would mean country champions, city champions, private sector champions, that we really adhere to this vision and will be ready to take the risk for implementing and supporting this program of bold and ambitious actions. So in conclusion, what we think we need is, one, a vision with clearly articulated goals that encompass not only the Paris Agreement, but also the SDGs. Second, we need a program of bold and ambitious actions. And then finally, we need a group of actors that will be empowered to really carry this agenda going forward. We hope to use the coming events in 2016 and this event to actually share with you this concept, socialize this idea, refine possibly based on reactions, so that at the end of the day, maybe at the end of the year, through those various events, we would be able to put together a proposal that is supported by a broad coalition in terms of vision, program of action, and coalition. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nancy, for this perspective from the World Bank. By the way, the first two speakers are MDBs and also MDB. And MDBs are very good in drawing lessons for the future, but I'm asking the remaining panelists not to copy us or to draw lessons. The first two speakers average 15 and 16 minutes, so we need to go a little bit faster. Our next speaker is Manfred Breithaupt. We are going by the same order of the program, not the seating. So I hope I did not put you on the spot. Manfred, of course, we all know GIZ, which used to be called GTZ. And whenever we talk about mobility and transport, Germany always jumps in the mind. I think they are playing disproportionately larger role in this global agenda. Manfred, for you.
Oh, I don't even need this. Too tall for this. So, thank you very much for inviting me to this important event. I will be dealing with urban mobility in my presentation. We all know this, and the situation has gotten worse and worse over the years, be it Jakarta, be it Manila, be it Cairo, all over the world. And this, unfortunately, are photos, are pictures of things we know. Pollution, also here in Indonesia, where we have still Euro 2 standards, but also in other places have worsened over the years. Traffic fatalities, we heard it already, 1.2, 1.3 million, nobody knows the exact figures. There's under-recording, in some of the countries, under-recording is 30-40%, in China, for example, and India. But also those are possibilities. How to change roads, urban roads, into other ways. On the right side, there is a New York photo after the restructuring. And all this can be done only if we reverse the well-known pyramid upside down. First pedestrians, walking and cycling, then public transport, so these three things being called active transport, then followed by intermediate transport, shared transport, finally individual car-based transport, right? So reversing the pyramid. And this is now the case, reversing the pyramid in many national transport policies, be it in India, in Brazil, in some other countries, Mexico. They have set up their urban transport policy outlining the importance of changing the way projects are seen and cities are planned. And also regarding financing. Remember, in many countries, 95, in Vietnam I did a survey on secondary cities, 95 to 98% of all the funds in urban mobility is going into road improvements and road widening. 98%, right? So maybe in Indonesia it's only 70 or 75%, but I'm sure it's over 70%. So and thank you for your contributions regarding financing. We have to deeply look into the financing structure. Sorry, I jumped over this. Transport energy consumption could be around 50% lower compared to the current level only by using readily available and cost-effective measures, which are already known. This according to a pretty known IEA report from 2014. How far can I travel with 1 ton of CO2? Those are the various modes. The best, of course, is a B-articulated bus when it comes to motor. I mean, if it comes to motorized travel, and of course, walking and cycling doesn't lead to any emissions. And then the B-articulated bus, a normal bus, and so on, trams, metros, and of course, motorcycles and individual cars have the lowest efficiency in terms of energy and climate use. We all agreed in the international community, bilaterals and multilaterals, to go according to the Avoid, Shift, Improve paradigm, which, to make it maybe more visual for some of you who may not be yet so familiar, whenever you do a trip, when you go shopping, you have to take various decisions. First, where do I buy? Next door, or do I drive to a shopping center 10 kilometers outside of town? Second, which mode will I use? Walking, cycling, and if you are going to buy very close, you walk. And finally, the decision about the fuel composition and about vehicle efficiency, as we call it, improve. When we decide on what mode to fund, be it tram, what has been mentioned now, or buses, Tyrrell said also that BRT is now high on the agenda of ADB, we have to ask the citizens. Let's first ask the customers what do they want. And they know exactly what they want, and let's then try to plan the system around the desires of the customers. They need easy access, comfort, rapid journey, safety, security, and so on. So public transport should be designed around the customer and not around the technology. I say this especially also because in Indonesia, but also many other countries, the discussion goes first around the technology, and finally the customer has to accept what will be provided, say this term. With the avoid measures, right, changing urban pattern, create mixed use and so on, we can save 10 to 30% of all the climate-related and energy-related resources. With a shift, changing the mode from individual transport to active travel, we can save up to 30%. And finally, with improved measures, fuels, and vehicle technology issues, another around 50% can be saved. And many of those things are not too expensive. So it's not always money what is missing and what hinders a implementation of those measures. How to go there? Please not by a project to project way, so that we are doing one project after the other without an overarching policy. We do need, and most of the countries have already, sustainable development, climate and energy goals. And based on this, we need a transport policy, especially, and I mentioned it, particularly a national urban transport policy. Such a national urban transport policy is the umbrella for anything which can be done then to improve the situation in cities. Before the project approach, we need to have an overarching policy. And even before the 5 years plan, and even before the strategies, we need to have a policy. Because this enables the ministries of planning, transport ministries, and so on, to easier get access to resources and to set up a financing scheme. Then, of course, institutions and the legal framework need to be harmonized with those goals. Very often we have overlapping institutions in cities. Finally, the taxation and charging policies. And not to forget, sustainable urban mobility plans, so that each and every city who requires support from the provincial and the national funding, so that they prepare a proper sustainable urban mobility plan with the stakeholders, with the population taken into consideration. Local transport plans. And as we all know, if you plan for people and places, you will get people and places. And if we continue to plan for cars and traffic, we get more cars and more traffic, induced travel. We all know it. But still, this paradigm is not everywhere used. So again, I'm using these charts pretty often, but it summarizes very nicely, and you can see it on the photo, all these points which are mentioned there. It's an integration of public transport with priority over all modes on the road. Non-motorized transport is present there. There is public space. Public space has been created. Public transport has been integrated TDM measures, car restriction measures, have been implemented as well. And Wago technology, yes, maybe the buses are of modern technology. They are at least Euro 4 in Bogota now, and they will be changing now again in Bogota. So, in case anybody thinks still that increased, and we have an economist, the lead economist of the World Bank here, that any growth inevitably goes with increase of traffic and transport. This is not the case. We can see on this chart, unfortunately, it's a bit small. We can see the North American pattern, which is the upper curve. We can see the European pattern. Here you have up to have the model splits. We can see that in the very rich cities like in Zurich, Tokyo, Düsseldorf, Frankfurt and Munich, we have a low share of individual transport, while the top of this curve is in Atlanta, Houston, where the average income is much lower than in many of those European cities. So actually the answer is transport can be decoupled from growth. That's the good news. Some of the leaders who have made it and changed their cities. This is a city we are supporting in Ukraine. It's Lviv. Together with IDB, and I'm very happy to say that we have organized 5 training workshops together over the last 5 years. We were very happy, and also the participants were happy to join. There were nearly 160 representatives from 35 countries in those courses. And we jointly published a publication, Big Cities, Big Challenges, Sustainable Urban Transport Across Major Middle East and North African Cities, which you can download from our webpage. And we are very much dedicated towards strengthening and deepening our cooperation with the Islamic Development Bank. A new report is coming out this year focusing on urban mobility planning. Finally, last words, I want to put your attention to a new German initiative which is coming up, and this is due to the fact that so far in earlier years there was not too much attention from the German government given on mobility issues. We could finally convince them now. Also, Corny Huizenga from Slocat had a big role in it. We could convince them to create this initiative. We call it Urban Mobility Beyond Cars. It will be set up during the year. And there will be a large financial contribution, about €1 billion per year, money which is channeled through the KfW, the German Development Bank. And also there will be an envelope for technical assistance, especially preparing projects, doing capacity buildings in the range of 10 to 20 million a year. That's also a lot for us, at least 10, 15, maybe even more million a year. I try to bring it into 1 or 2 sentences now, that long thing. It is supposed to start in 2017 for initial 5 years. And those are the 3 main pillars. Enable, let's say, 1,000 urban leaders, decision makers and planners to plan and implement sustainable mobility concepts. Second is move fast component with 15 city pilot activities. And finally, to develop hubs around the world where knowledge will be shared and those messages can be further followed up. There is already some partners we have been talking with and who are in principle interested to join. So we will continue this discussion next week. There will be at the Leipzig Forum another round of discussion concerning this initiative. So if you are interested in any material from us, please visit our 2 pages, sutp.org for all the material we have developed on urban mobility, and capsut.org is a dedicated web page on capacity building in urban mobility. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Manfred. Manfred is tall, so he removed this side. Manfred, it's very remarkable that German is well known for their car industry. They're promoting non-car-based transport and mobility agenda. Our next speaker is Corny Huizenga, if I said it correctly. He's the Secretary General of SLOCAT, and I'm sure he's going to start by defining or telling you a little bit about what SLOCAT is all about. Corny.
Thank you. Thank you to the previous speakers for making my life easier. There's a formal title here which says Scaled Up Sustainable Transport in Support of the Paris Agreement on Climate Change and the 2030 Agenda on Sustainable Development. You could also call it the Green Shoots presentation. Like what I wanted to do is to give a little bit more of a positive, a little bit more optimistic or upbeat outlook. And I want to do that by also putting it a little bit in context of what we have heard so far and take a few steps back where we came from, because I think sometimes we are focusing too much on all the challenges that are still ahead of us, and I don't think that we fully realize and recognize what we have actually achieved already. So very briefly, what is this animal called SLOCAT? We sometimes do get emails where it says the slow cat, but SLOCAT stands for Sustainable Low Carbon Transport. This is a partnership which was set up in 2009, and the idea was very simple. There are a lot of the people, including the organizations that are sitting on stage, which are actually working on sustainable transport at the city level, at the country level. But what we saw was that there were a number of emerging global discussions on climate change and sustainable development, and that we did not see transport sufficiently recognized there. Nancy spoke about that, for example, that climate finance is being dominated by energy. I think that this is one of the examples, and we said that if we want to make progress on climate change and on sustainable development, transport needs to be part of the discussion. We are very happy that we are not doing that on our own, but we can do this with 100 different organizations representing the UN, the multilateral development banks, international organizations, NGOs, private sector, academia, etc. And a big thank you to all the people whose logo is on the screen to make our work possible. And our mission is very simple. We are not involved in implementation, but we are really focusing on these processes at the global level. And currently, there are 4 processes which dominate the international discussion on development. Like first, we have the climate change agenda, and I think that we spoke about the Paris Agreement, and we are now looking forward to what's going to happen in Morocco later this year at COP22. We also have the Sustainable Development Goals. Another important process which is happening at the moment is the Habitat 3 conference. This is a process which takes place every 20 years, and this is where the global community comes together to define what is the urban agenda. And since this only happens 20 years, this comes at a very fortunate time that we are doing this in the year after the SDGs and after the climate change. In addition to that, we also have a conference on trade and development happening this year in Nairobi, the UNCTAD 14. And when I talk about green shoots, I mean that if I look at these 4 processes, all these 4 processes substantially empower the transport sector to take action. So in other words, we are no longer in a situation that we need to say we need attention, that we need to be part of the agenda. These 4 processes all recognize the role of transport. So it's now, as Nancy said, the ball is now in our court, and that we say, what are we going to do with the opportunities presented to us? Just to give you a brief flavor of how SLOCAT is interacting with these processes, we are engaged in all of these 4 processes. If you look at sustainable development, I think that reference was being made to the $175 billion commitment by the multilateral development banks. This was an idea which initially came up through SLOCAT, and which we then took to our multilateral development bank members and say, like, let's make this happen. We have been active in promoting to see how transport can be integrated in the SDGs, and we'll say a little bit more about that later. In addition to that, we are working with the high-level advisory group of the Secretary General on sustainable transport. Again, it's another green shoot which shows that things can happen. On climate change, we will say a bit more about this later, but we talked about the actions by non-state actors. This is something where these 15 initiatives that Nancy also referred to, we helped to put this 15 together. We have been organizing transport days at the various COPs in order to mobilize the transport sector. On the habitat process, we will be organizing something which is called the Quito Action Plan on Sustainable Urban Transport, where we are going to rally again all the commitments which have been made by people on urban transport, including the one that Manfred presented on the German Mobility Initiative. On UNCTAD, on trade, it's very encouraging to see that the draft outcome document from the UNCTAD conference actually has a separate section on transport and which recognizes the need of sustainable transport to enable trade and development. And we're very happy to organize a ministerial roundtable later this year in Nairobi together with UNCTAD on this topic. And this is where the Secretary General makes his appearance. Coming back to the Sustainable Development Goals. There are 17 Sustainable Development Goals, and the difference with the Millennium Development Goals, which preceded this set of goals, is that there is much more emphasis on development. The previous one was dominated by social issues and to some extent by environment, but the expansion from 8 to 17 enabled us to bring in the productive sectors. And if you look at it, transport does not have its own goal. So you can say bad news, but transport is actually mentioned in 8 out of the 17 goals. So we really have been mainstream. And it is like what was said by the previous speakers. We see 2 areas of emphasis. We see targets which talks about we need to grow the transport sector, and this is about rural access, urban access, and regional connectivity. And we need to do transport differently. So it's really this challenge, how can we do that? We heard from the previous speaker that if you go for doing transport differently, that it is actually more sustainable and that it's also cheaper to society. So it's actually a win-win, as Tyrrell was talking about. Now we come to the challenging stuff. When we went to Paris last year, there was great skepticism. Are we going to get an agreement? If we get an agreement, do we have a climate target? If we get a climate target, how soft is the target going to be? The big surprise was that we left Paris not with a soft target, but with a very ambitious target. It was agreed that the global community will move to a target of well below the 2-degree scenario and pursue efforts to limit temperature increase to 1.5 degrees Celsius. What does that mean in the case of the transport sector? The red line here is the business as usual, up to 2050. The blue line is the 2-degree scenario, and the green line is the 1.5. So just imagine what kind of transport sector is associated with this green line in 2050. The answer is simple. It is a largely decarbonized transport sector. So it means that over the next 35 years, we are going to see one of the biggest changes that we have seen since the Industrial Revolution in terms of how the transport sector functions. A transport sector which at the moment is still 95% dominated by fossil fuels, that we are going to have a transport sector which will only be 15% using fossil fuels. So this is something, I think, to get our heads around it. This is one, and I think that the transport sector is still coming to terms with the size of the challenge. When we went to Paris, Nobody in the transport sector had modeled the green line. The only thing that the transport community had modeled was the blue line. And everybody said, this is too ambitious for the transport sector. So it means that we really need to rally together. We need to scale up the level of our ambition, as Nancy said, and we need to make certain that we really come up with transformative change. And as previous speakers have said, project by project is not going to get us there. So now if we look at it, what does this mean for the world? By 2050 or 2060, we will be decarbonized, but going there is a different thing. And not all parts of the world will move at the same speed. We talked about the need to improve access, which will mean that we have to grow the transport sector. And it also means that we have differentiated pathways for the developed and the developing world. The developing world, and if we talk about Asia, we will see that there is going to be an increase in emissions. And that even in the 1.5 scenario, based on our initial analysis, that you can see that there is one little blue bar, which is non-OECD Asia, which would still have a marginal increase in transport emissions. These are tentative numbers, and what we see is that there is a large number of organizations which is now stepping up its modeling exercises, that we really know what these pathways are going to be for the different parts of the world. We also seen, and people have spoken about, this what we call the nationally determined contributions. What is it that the governments pledge to do in order to address climate change? On mitigation, we saw that 77% of the countries who made these commitments last year indicated transport as one of the sectors where they are going to take action. Remember, these commitments only come into force in 2020. So we still have 4 years in order to make them more ambitious, and we have 4 years to take action to make life easier in achieving this. What we see is that 61% of these countries actually included specific transport measures in these NDCs, and they range from a large number of topics. There was an emphasis on technology, and we felt that there is not enough emphasis on behavioral change, on modal split, public transport, and things like that. Adaptation, even though we know it's going to be important, also in this part of the world was not mentioned very much. Then we have these initiatives which were being mentioned. It is very encouraging to see that the transport sector itself is saying we can and we want and we will take action. And they are doing that in 15 different initiatives, ranging from aviation, railways, public transport, electric mobility, planning, cycling, electric mobility. So there is a whole range. And if you look at it, the initial analysis of this shows that this is global in action, and this is large scale, and that if we implement all of these as committed, that we will change at least 1 in 2 trips by 2025. So it really shows that there is a potential within the transport sector. It also, the good news is that evaluation shows that at a macroeconomic level, that we would save literally trillions of dollars because of avoided investments in fuels, in vehicles, and in certain types of infrastructure. So now, can we bring these things together? What the governments are planning to do through the NDCs and what the non-state actors are planning to do through their initiatives. And our initial analysis shows that this is actually a very good fit. And we are very encouraged that based on the discussions with the new COP president, Morocco, that they announced that they really want to see bringing these 2 pillars of action together. So this really puts the transport sector in a very good position because we have strong initiatives, we have strong commitment from the government, so that really gives us an enabling position to move forward. Then just to summarize, we would like to echo what Nancy said. In order to move forward, we need to have a global narrative on sustainable low-carbon transport that supports short, medium, and long-term action. We cannot just focus on the short term, we need to look forward as well. We need to have this common framework, we need to have a global roadmap, and we need to have quick wins. Just on this is a very easy slide because I could copy it from Nancy. So we need to look at these goals, and we need to refine them, we need to discuss them, and we need to build consensus around those. What we do need to realize, and this is something that needs to be expressed in the tracking framework, is that we say not all countries will move at the same speed on all the 4 goals. So we need to have a differentiated pathway. I just wanted to focus briefly, how many people from the private sector are in the room? If you are private sector, can you raise your hands? So we have 3 private sector, and private sector likes to sit in the back, it seems, that the private sector is going to play a key role in the decarbonization of the transport sector. We are asking the private sector to change its business model in terms of the technologies it's developing and how they are deploying these technologies. So what is important is that policymakers should give a long-term perspective to private sector and say, like, how to structure their future technology development, how to structure their investments. And this is why we would like to have a global roadmap which really explains how do we get there to this decarbonized transport sector. And we realize that in the developed world we can move faster, and that in the developing world we will move slower. But we need to move in both cases. And then what is important is that if we talk about these goals, if we talk about this long-term action, we should not forget that we can take action now, and that there are things, and I think that Manfred's presentation was brilliant in the sense that he listed a whole series of interventions which are possible at this moment, and what we call quick wins, because we think it's very seductive. Everybody wants to win, and everybody wants to win quickly. So that these are things that can be implemented quickly. Fuel subsidies, fuel economy standards, sustainable urban mobility plans, and, for example, sustainable freight recognition programs are just a couple of examples of that. And then just to summarize, we need to build consensus, because only if, as a community, we support all of these goals, if we support the tracking framework and this vision, if we support it, then we are strong together. And Ségolène Royal at the climate summit that Nancy referred to had a very nice speech, she quoted an African proverb, and she said, you act alone, you go fast, you act together, you go far. And I think that that is what is underlining, I think, this slide, that we need to build this consensus. What is important is that we need to get more commitment from national governments. We need to have the presidents, we need to have the prime ministers, the captains of industry. They need to fall in line and support what we are developing in this year. Then we need to come up with a medium-term strategy, and then in terms of, like as Nancy indicated, we need to think about what is the governance that can underpin all of this. We will be organizing 3 big events in terms of promotion since Tyrrell introduced this good tradition of speaking about an event. We will have 3 transport days, one in Surabaya during the PrepCom of Habitat 3, one in Quito during the Habitat 3 conference, and one in Marrakesh during the COP. Thank you, and I hope that the next time that we meet, that we no longer speak about green shoots, but that we say like, that it's becoming a field and that we can no longer look over it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Courtney. I mean, I'm sure you agree. So far, we have heard very brilliant and rich presentation. The only problem is that the first part of the seminar seems to have cannibalized the second part. So we are almost reaching an end. We will hope to open it up for some Q&A, but not before we listen to our last and not least speaker, Brother Bambang Prihartono, who is our host. He is the Director of Transport in Bappenas, which is the National Planning Agency of Indonesia. Bambang.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Have a good day, everybody. I have 2 minutes my time, 10 minutes. I have 34 slides. I think maybe I apologize if I have to skip several slides. You know that before you enter here, we play a video about the mass transportation in Jakarta. I think that's our dreaming, and then how to develop the sustainable transport in Jakarta. And then we have been assisted by GIZ, and then also we have produced kind of guideline how to build mass transportation in a big city and medium city. And also, we also produce a toolkit how to implement the sustainable transport in urban area. And also, you know that this is a Manfred. Manfred is assist us for a long time, yeah, Pak Manfred, yeah. And then I think we have produced so many ideas of policy how to build the urban transport. Basically, my presentation will be two parts. In the first one is a little bit about theory, and maybe the rest about the action plan. You know that every speaker here talking about the sustainable about transportation, and then my title today is how about the sustainable transportation policy in Indonesia. Next. You know that we need a kind of a policy how to reduce the environmental impact in transportation. If not, next please. Yes. If not, you can see the trend for the red color, and then we are going to achieve for the green color one. So there is a policy gap in here before we know that there is a destruction environment in everywhere. Next, why transport sector? You see that 23% of total energy related to carbon dioxide emission come from transport sectors. And then half of the emission come from urban transport, passengers and freight. So you can imagine that the transport sector become more important to reduce the emission. Next. If you look at the outlook, and then you know that Indonesia has the biggest energy consumption. In our data in 2005, this is around about 58%. And also carbon dioxide emission from motor vehicle is around 20% from total energy based on the data 2005. And also, you can see carbon dioxide emission in 2010 achieved around 67 million ton. And then, if you look at the distribution of the use of fuel consumption in transport sectors, the road is the biggest, around 90.7%. Why is that? Because for more than 30 years, we built the road, Pak. Because we don't have any good road network system at that time. So the government policy to build road across the country. But for other mode of transportation, for example, rail is the less than 1%. I think I agree about Eddie's suggestion that we have to build railway system in order to reduce the emission. That's why for the next 5 years, if you look at our national 5 years plan, I think we are going to build the railway system around out of Java, especially in Sumatra, Kalimantan, Sulawesi, and also we are going to initiate to build the railway in Papua. Next. Based on G20 commitment, I think Indonesia have to reduce around 26% of emission. We realize that it is not easy for us, and then we have to calculate how many percent from sector transport in order to support the reduced emission 26%. This is our homework actually. Next, in our mitigation action, we are going to see how to build the sustainable urban transport in order ASI system, avoid, save and improve. We are going to avoid or to reduce the demand of travel, and also we have to save from the passenger car to the public transport car. And also we are going to improve the energy efficiency of transport vehicle and technology. That's our strategy in order to achieve the sustainable urban transport program. Next. This is a little bit explanation what we are going to do for the avoid and reduce and also save and also improve. Next. For the adaptation action transport sector, we have to protect our infrastructure and also retrofitting, redesign. Sometimes we have to redesign our infrastructure because of climate change. And also we need also the regulation some infrastructure because there is some part of infrastructures flooding all the time. For example, we have a station in Central Java in Semarang. Then there is a flooding all the time. I think we have to reallocate that station. Next. Now, the transformation improvement of urban transport sustainability, we have a national consultation. Every year, we have a national consultation in Jakarta. And then we invite the local government and also line ministry and also the central government meet under the Mustan Bangnas. We call that national development and also trial meeting. We discuss with the local government what we are going to do for the next years. The consultation will be held every year. Next. Sustainable transport policy in Indonesia. We are going to do, the first one is how to improve the public transit system. For example, bus and railway orientation and also with modal transfer facility. For doing that, we have also to construct what we call that rail-based rapid mass transit. Now it's under construction MRT in Jakarta between the southern part to the northern part of Jakarta. And also in next future, we are going to build LRT in Palembang, in Jakarta, and also in Bandung. And also we are going to build urban rail in 10 metropolitan cities. For example, Batam, Medan, Palembang, and so on and so on. And also we are going to develop BRT in 34 major cities. And then after that, we have to enlarge the capacity, the quality of city road. We are going to enlarge the ratio of urban road minimum 10% of area to the efficient possibility. And also we are going to develop the capacity and quality of the road, and so on and so on. Next. The next policy is we are going to construct of the rail-based mass transit rapidly among others MRT in Greater Jakarta and Jabodetabek Railway overpass circular line, as well as LRT, monorail, and tram. In urban rail development in 10 metropolitan cities, I mentioned before Batam, Medan, Palembang, and so on and so on. Next. And then we are going to develop BRT in 34 large cities, include Medan, Pekanbaru, Batam, Padang, Palembang, and so on and so on. And after that, now we are thinking about how to provide kind of provision of funding subsidy, because until now we have difficulty to maintain how to operate the bus BRT, what we have delivery to all the cities. Next. I think I have to skip this one. Next. The needs of urban transport infrastructure, I think we have to build the BRT infrastructure in order to support the mass transit, and also we are going to build the rail-based mass transit